Hello! The title is not clickbait. I actually really dislike sensationalism, so I'm gonna tell you off the bat, this is not a magic trick, it's not rocket science, it's just a very simple approach that I have been using for years to make my Linux experience far more stable, far more enjoyable, and I've learned a lot more because of it. Normally, I would just say the thing up front, but I think in this case, a fair amount of context is required for you to really understand my point of view on it, so I'm gonna give you that. I started using Linux with Arch and with KDE 5, and I stuck to KDE 5 for a number of years before switching to anything else. I pretty much used default configuration and default applications for the majority of my time with KDE 5, the only notable exceptions to that being I switched out my web browser since KDE's default browser kind of sucks, and I switched out my music player since I'm pretty passionate about music players. Now, Arch famously drops you into just a blank terminal with no help, no guidance other than like the wiki and any tutorials you can find. So I struggled through that. It took me days to get it finally installed, but I did walk away with the understanding that the terminal is really the keys to your system, right? Like the terminal is what you want to understand if you want to understand Linux. So I knew that was the direction I wanted to go in terms of understanding the system, and I had found a number of like those old free cybersecurity courses on YouTube, like they're probably still there, right? You could just like follow along with them, and it took me years to really get more of an understanding of my system, but I did, follow along with those courses in the terminal, and I started to understand how the terminal actually worked. And at some point, after a while of doing that, and a while of just using KDE casually, I started to see, okay, there's this surge in popularity of this thing called a tiling window manager, and a lot of people are doing way more of their work in the terminal directly as opposed to graphical applications. So I saw that and I figured that was worth pursuing because to me it seemed like it would be way more efficient for my particular workflow as opposed to just the default KDE experience of alt-tabbing around everything, very similar to the default Windows experience. Back then KDE did not have tiling integrated. By now I believe like KWin does support tiling window management, but back then it would have been like a plugin, I guess, if that even existed. So I saw tiling window managers, I decided I wanted to use one, so I found one I liked, I installed it on my laptop, and I played around with it for a good month, configuring it, starting to understand how it works, and eventually I decided, yeah, this is a lot more efficient for me, so I'm gonna move it over to my desktop. And the rest is history from there, right? I just went down the path of looking for simpler terminal-based applications, and then I got to where I'm at now with it. Now, I say all of this to make a really important point, okay? If I had immediately jumped into tiling window management and terminal-based applications when I first started using Linux, I would have struggled. I would have really struggled. It took me years to really understand the fundamentals of Linux, even going at a pace where I was trying to, expose myself to more information and really trying to learn how the system works. My brain is not naturally inclined towards this sort of stuff, so it took me a while. If I had immediately jumped into tiling window management, I may well have quit early on, because it would have been a struggle for me. But instead, because I took those years to learn the fundamentals of how Linux worked as I was just comfortably sitting in KDE, that gave me the time to really understand those things before I made the move over to tiling window management and doing a lot more terminal-based stuff. So let's bring this back to how to use Linux better, because I think this is really a far better approach, okay? And let me put it in a little bit more of a succinct and concrete way, okay? The grass is not always greener on the other side. You don't always want to be searching for the better alternative to things. Instead, you want to be taking the time to really learn what is in front of you, because you may well find that what you have in front of you is the better alternative, or at the very least, you're perfectly happy with it until you end up realizing later on, maybe there is something else that I want. But you need that time to figure out what you really want when it comes to your distro, your software, how you're using your applications. You need that time. And once you've given yourself that time, you'll have a far better understanding of how things work before you make the move to the place that the grass might be greener. And additionally, you also want to be moving in the direction of simplicity rather than complexity. Now, I have a number of reasons for this, and I'm going to explain them to you. I have both technical reasoning and abstract reasoning. Let's start with the technical reasoning, okay? When you first install Linux, if you are constantly ripping things in and out of your system, you're going to be left with remnants of applications, remnants of configuration that results in a really unstable and buggy system. And I say this for two reasons. The first reason being, I know when I first started using Linux, I struggled to understand how package management worked and how to install stuff properly. Like, I think I got how Arch's package management works with Pacman, but I still, I remember I had DebTap installed for some reason. DebTap is a program to convert Debian-based packages to Arch packages. I don't know why I needed that. I don't think I had a real reason for needing that, other than that I couldn't figure out how to install something properly with, Arch or the AUR or something. So that's just one example of how newer users might struggle to understand how stuff actually works. I have a friend who switched to using Linux pretty recently, and he didn't know that his distro had a package manager. I had to tell him, your distro has a package manager, that's how you're supposed to be installing packages. I had to tell him that was how it worked. And that just goes to show, this isn't me being, condescending and saying new people don't know what they're doing. It can be kind of complex to understand, especially if you're coming over from Windows or Apple, Mac OS, to understand how the Linux way of handling applications and packages works, especially because it's different from distro to distro. It can be really complex. So if you're ripping stuff in and out constantly, you might have so much stuff, left over in your system that results in a really buggy, unstable experience. And nobody wants to have a bad experience with Linux. So why do that? Instead, just pick something simple, stick with it, get to know it, get to learn it, and then once you have that experience knowing how it works, then you'll be informed enough to make the choice to move to something else if you think that other thing is better. And to give you another example here, okay, the ZSH shell has plugins, and there's a pretty popular plugin manager called OhmyZSH. People use it for plugin management and for theming. Now, a lot of newer users seem to have the misconception that you need OhmyZSH, that it is essential for plugin management because otherwise it's going to be super hard to manage your plugins or something like that, which is completely untrue. All you have to do is just source the plugin in your ZSH configuration. You just source the path of the plugin, which is a way simpler way of doing things, and if you're only using a couple plugins, you absolutely don't need OhmyZSH. Now, that's not to say that the people who are using OhmyZSH might not have legitimate reasoning for using it. The more seasoned users who understand the intricacies of something, the ins and outs, and the nuances, they may well have really good reasoning for why they're choosing to use something. But a newer user might not understand that, and they might instead think, oh, that's something I have to have. And then they install a bunch of those things that they think they have to have because there's so much conflicting advice from all sides on what you should be installing that they end up with a buggy mess of a system. Now let me give you a more abstract example here, a more abstract analogy. Say you have a piano, right? And if you just walk up to that piano and you don't know how to play piano, you're going to end up with something that sounds really bad if you're just randomly pressing keys. Whereas if you take the time to learn how to play piano, which admittedly I would say has a really steep learning curve, I've tried to learn some of the basics and I personally can't play piano at all very well. And I think there is a pretty steep learning curve there, just as there is with a lot of the tools in Linux, right? You're gonna have a steep learning curve on some stuff. That doesn't mean the tool is bad. That just means you have to take the time and have the patience to learn how it works. And if you're constantly hopping from thing to thing to thing, you're at best going to get a superficial understanding of stuff. You're not going to have a real deeper understanding of how those tools actually work. Whereas if you take the time to really learn them, you will understand how they work and you'll have a way better experience with Linux overall. Anyways, I think that's about what I had to say. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Peace!